All right, we are live again this week. Thank you so much for joining us. Yes, it's our fifth episode here at the Author's Dilemma. I'm one of your hosts, J.E. Jack. I write paranormal thrillers and urban fantasy.
I'm Hyrum Hawks, and I write hard sci-fi and sci-fantasy.
And I'm Jennifer Carr, and I write Christian suspense and contemporary romance.
Yes, I had a momentarily pause there because I was like, what do I write? I'm all over the place.
Existential dread.
Yeah. It's like, who am I? What do I do with my hands? All right. So first off, I just want to welcome everybody again. Thank you so much for joining us. If you have any questions tonight or in the future, if you're listening to this on podcast, be sure to reach out to us at the author or at authorsdilemma@gmail.com. Or if you happen to be here live with us, be sure to use the comments and we'll try to answer the questions the best we can. And if you're watching, be sure to tell us where you're watching from and we'll say hello. All right. So tonight we are talking about, well, there was a little bit of confusion. We were talking about character development and story ideas.
Turns out they're the same thing.
Yeah.
Some of us it is.
Yes. So really it's kind of like the chicken and the egg, right? Which came first, right? The story or the character? And so we're going to go around and, well, first off, before we get into that, we're going to talk about our updates and what was going on in our business, because that's the whole point of this show, is to not only talk about the writing, but also talk about the business aspect of it. There's so much that goes on behind the scenes. And, you know, if you're an author and you're listening to this, you totally understand where we're coming from. So what have we accomplished this week? What do we want to do, and where we're currently at? So Hyrum, let's start with you.
Sure. So this week, I've been getting my book published. I learned some big things about Ingram Spark, like you can't make mistakes or else they'll never publish your book. And it's been in processing for over 2 weeks, and I don't know if it ever will come out. So it's a good thing I've got Kindle to publish on. Mm-hmm. I put a typo in the stupid ISBN, and that's it. I'm done. Apparently, I can't publish. So I've been upgraded. So be careful. Double check that one on if you ever do Ingram Spark. It will be a nightmare for you. So yeah, getting ready for publishing. Getting ready for next week, where I'm going to LTUE. It's a writing convention for sci-fi and fantasy in Provo, Utah. If you happen to be there, I'd love to meet you. I'll have a table with another fantasy author, Dan Kenner, who you might know from TikTok. Great.
What's the date on that?
That is February 15th through 17th.
And what time?
All day.
Okay.
It's a 3-day convention. So I'll be there.
Perfect.
And next week I should be broadcasting from Provo. Life, the Universe, and Everything. That's what LTUE stands for. That's a reference to good old Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And yes, it has been at least 25 years since I read that. Other than that, so that's the big getting ready for publication, because I've made my publication date coincide with LTUE. So if you've pre-ordered my book, it'll be there. And I'm excited to get that moving. I am already writing the sequel. Though I keep getting distracted by silly things like Jen put into the chat for us, and then the dragons came, and so we started putting first lines of books with, and then the dragons came, and then I put Pride and Prejudice as first line with that, and then I proceeded to figure out an entire new story idea, which we'll go into in a little bit. So,
which honestly, I think one of the charms of that chat was Jen's Harry Potter beginning, which we can't really talk about now because that's a whole nother conversation. And sorry, everybody listening that's probably interested. We'll do a whole show on that some other time. All right, Jen. By the way, Ingram Sparks is a very tedious website to go through to release your books. I mean, every time I deal with that, it's always an issue, and it's always back and forth, and Amazon does make it easy. Fortunately or unfortunately, Amazon makes it easy. And
it is live on Kobo too.
But
that one's just for the international ebook market.
I don't even know I know what Kobo is, but Well, I don't really know what Kobo is.
I've heard the
I've heard of
word.
it. Yeah. All right, Jen, what about you? What's going on in your business?
Well, let's see. My third book, Fall When You're Ready, it came out last Thursday, so it's been out for a week.
Good.
Thank you. It's gotten some pretty cool reviews, which I've shared some over on my Facebook page, which you can find me at J Carr Writes. And that's been an experience, just connecting with people. And one of my favorite things, and I'll talk about it when we get into the topic, but people are like, I just really connected with the characters. And so, that warms my heart, because characters drive stories for me. And so that's been fun. And I've been working on the sequel to that book, and I'm about 3/4 of the way through, and then I'll be sending it off to my editor, and I'm really excited.
So, how many books do you have right now?
3.
3. Okay, fantastic. Okay. So, well, my news isn't as as exciting as you guys. I now have a email that's attached to my website, and that took this past weekend I was pulling my hair out, which I'm growing a lot more of it now. So I have a lot more to grab onto. But yeah, so, with newsletters, my newsletters got awful, which basically is non-existent. So that's what I'm working on now, is getting my newsletter up and running. So in order to do that, I needed a more professional email, and I finally got that working, thankfully. And so that's my next goal, is to get a newsletter up and running, and then a new website for myself. And then also I'm working on my current urban fantasy novel. So that's all that's fit to print or to listen to tonight. So getting into the meat and potatoes of tonight's show, we are going to talk about story development and character development. We all have different processes of doing it, and in order to do that, we need to talk about how we wrote our books. And by the way, if you're watching this now, if you have any questions throughout this whole process, be sure to pop them in the comments, and we will try to answer as best we can. So
we guarantee we will at least try to make them somewhat accurate.
Yeah, well, as best we can. Hyrum, let's talk about your books, man. Talk about your process. How'd you come up with your ideas? How'd you come up with your characters?
Well, I have a couple of go-tos. The first is shower. I shower, and because apparently you're supposed to.
That's
and it turns out when water is pounding on my skull and I don't have anything distracting me, ideas just come. And I've had to get to the point where I really should get something to write on in the shower, but I haven't been able to find anything good. And I'll occasionally just yell out to my wife, hey, I need you to write something down before I forget it. And so that does happen. But what I've found is that ideas come when I'm not busy doing something with my brain. Like if I'm doing something with my hands, if I'm taking a shower, if I'm driving, if I'm just kind of half-heartedly engaging with something. So my first book, which I have not published, it's kind of novel novella border area. It's called what did I call it? Quixote and the Conspiracy Theorist. And I was listening to the Writing Excuses podcast, which is still, I guarantee it will help you in your writing. I was listening to it, and they were talking about characters, and you can't have a character who is truly, completely unlikable. And I said, challenge accepted. And I started thinking about the most unlikable people, which are conspiracy theorists, the ones that are really, really vitriolic, the ones that hate humanity because, and that is what one of my other sources is, conspiracy theories. Great source for story ideas.
The ones that are proven right 6 months later. I mean, just kidding.
Exactly.
Moving on.
But
different podcast.
Yeah, different
whether
podcast.
or not the conspiracy theory is right is irrelevant. It's about their attitude. It's about how they are. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to try to make this character. No, you can't. It turns out that they're right. Well, how do you make it so that this? Because I have an idea. I've got this conspiracy theorist, and he's right. He invents something to go to outer space because he wants to prove the Earth is flat. So he invents propellantless thrusters that use quantum entanglement to, I just put in buzzwords here. It doesn't matter what the buzzwords are, that make it so you can fly into space with no energy. Great. It's magic. It's sci-fi. But how do you make him likable? Give him a pet and make the pet the actual point of view character. And so I thought, what's a funny character? What's a funny pet? A ferret. And so there is a bioengineered ferret that is the pet of this crazy conspiracy theorist, and that's the entire the story just wrote itself after that. So that was my first story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it was character driven.
It was somewhat character driven, but I also wanted the conspiracy theorist to succeed at getting into space because I'm a nerd for outer space. So it was kind of both. Now, my second book was situation driven. It's The Persian Asteroid. That one I published last July, and fundamentally, I'd spent some time in Turkey for work. I'm an engineer, and I spend a lot of time overseas.
Oh no!
No. So for those of you listening to this,
I thought I lost
There he
you
is.
for a second. I had a blink.
He
So-
paused for a bit. He had
It
a
was-
lot to think about in that moment. He dropped,
That
and now
was-
he's back.
He's back.
It was probably because I'm about to talk about the Iranian regime and all that. But
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted, the whole point was I wanted to have the main characters escape on a rocket.
Mm-hmm.
That was the story. That's where it started. The characters came after that. Everything came after that. I wanted them to escape on a rocket. Well, where can you escape from? A lot of places, but I put them in Iran because I was sitting in Turkey. They can escape from Iran to Turkey. And then the story, I wrote it, in some sense, I wrote the end first, then the beginning, and then rewrote the end like 6 times because it's not exactly, the end didn't quite meet the whole escape from Iran in a rocket ship. It changed. And so it's a spoiler, but not a big spoiler. They escape. Of course, it's a happy, I write happy endings. So that's how I got the second book. My third book came because I went to LTUE last year and I like pictures of dragons. And
That's fair.
And eventually I started writing a book that spawned an idea for a different book that then I wrote first.
Mm-hmm.
So it's so chaotic. If you try to when you actually say it out loud, you realize you sound insane because
Oh no!
because the
we get
ideas
it.
are everywhere. And so for the non-authors listening to this, the real author's dilemma is you got too many ideas.
Right.
And you can't possibly write them all. Because I also, because of our conversation, came up with an idea for a Pride and Prejudice version where Darcy and Bingley are dragons and the love interests want to become dragon riders. So it's not a marriage thing anymore. It's about being a dragon rider. I like dragons.
But you bring up an important part about stories. And we talked about this before, on text before. Like, hey, we don't want to steal your stories. We don't want your stories. We got plenty enough over. Because that's a problem that I have as an author. Like, people come up and say, "Hey, man, I got a story for you to write." Sorry, bro.
No, you don't.
Good.
Sorry, bud. I'm good.
Nope.
I got plenty of my own stories that I got to get to.
Yep.
And one other part of this that again, back to writing excuses, they pointed this out. A story, your one idea is not sufficient. That rocket idea, just escaping from Iran in a rocket, that is not a whole story. That's a short story. That's like you could write that one in 5,000 words. You take one idea, then you take another idea, then you take a third idea, then you take a fourth idea, and you merge them and they metastatize, if you want to say, and they become something strange and different. And that's why you have so many story ideas that are just dragon, rider, hero's journey, boom. I just described 800 different series.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But because you take your unique different set of things and you mix them in, maybe like my Valley of Death, the Valley of Death, which I just wrote, has all sorts of characters. It has a hero's journey. It has all this stuff, but I put it with glyph magic, which is kind of unique. It still exists, but it's kind of along with atomic era, 1940s tech. That just those two things made it very unique.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, combine and conquer.
I like it.
All right. You talk about writing excuses, and honestly, I had not heard of that podcast, or maybe I don't know, but I haven't listened to it, or I forgot about it. And when you brought it up last week, I was like, I'm going to try that out, and I am binging through that. It's really good. and it's funny because they mentioned something today about the difference between short stories and novels, and unfortunately, I cannot remember. It's episode 9.
Quotient?
No. It just talks about like
Oh.
short stories are for this and novels are for this. It was like short stories are for ideas, novels are for characters or conflict and things like that. So it's a little bit
longer
different.
More.
Right.
The more ideas you combine, the more likely it is a novel.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right. All right. So Jen, moving over to you. How do you do? How do you do what you do?
How do I do what I do? Well, it just it always starts with a character. My first book, no matter what, it started, I woke up from a dream, but in my dream, the main character, she has these abilities she can read people's body language. She can discern facial expressions. If you've ever seen the TV show Lie to Me, it's very similar to that. Like that was her skill set. I actually did a lot of research on the guy who, because that's based on a real science through the FBI and that kind of thing. And so anyway, so I woke up and I wanted to know what her story was. I wanted to know where her story took her. I wanted to know how she used her abilities to solve the crimes that she was solving and that kind of thing. And so my stories are always character driven. The second book, which is a follow-up to No Matter What, it follows one of the characters from the first book, and it takes, we see from his point of view, him taking a life change. He leaves the FBI and becomes a smaller area sheriff in rural Kentucky, which that's a big deal when you go from DC to Kentucky, and like how does this affect him? And he just has this growth journey. And then in my third book, which is not related to the first two, I heard a song, and I love 90s country, like that's my jam. And so I was listening to the radio and a song came on, and it's, the lyrics are Fall When You're Ready. And these characters just popped into my head and they said, hey, this is our song. Now you have to tell the story. And I was like, oh, okay, great. And so it's always character first for me. It's rarely the story. The characters just kind of tell me what they want me to say.
That's interesting. Do you think that's because maybe is genre maybe like
maybe, but also I am an observer and always have been of people. I am I'm a counselor, I'm a psychologist, and so people fascinate me anyway. And so I've always been a people watcher, and I invest in people and that kind of thing. So I think it's more of people are my jam, but I don't want to be too close to them.
Arm's length. Yeah.
I like you.
I like you,
not
a counselor.
I like my wife,
right?
My kids. And sometimes other people, but that's about it.
Right.
Well, me personally, I think it's important as a writer to be observant, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because that's how you, observant of your surroundings, observant of the people you deal with, observant of situations that you can use later. I think to be a good writer, I think you have to be a good observer. It's interesting when you were talking about your first character and then Lie to Me. There's another show on Peacock called Poker Face, I believe. I haven't watched it all because I don't have a subscription. Yeah, that's another problem these days, right? I mean, there's so many subscriptions, or there's so many like streaming services. But that basically same thing. This character, she knows when people are lying to her, and it's a really good show. And I think the first episode was free, so that's why I watched it. I'm like, man, I could really, but I'm not going to pay that.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I like it, but not that much.
That's right.
Kind of like people. I like them, but not that much.
Good.
I'm just kidding.
No, you're not.
Yeah. I like the people watching this show and listening to it right now.
We love those people.
Yeah. And those that read our books.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything like, so when it comes to characters, how do you create your characters?
They honestly, and it sounds so crazy. If you're not an author, this is going to sound nuts, but like they tell me who they're going to be. They tell me what they want to do, and we work with that. Like that's just what it is. Like we have full on conversations sometimes, and I think about them all the time, like they're real people. So honestly, I don't know that that's very helpful because you're not in my head, so I can't really explain it much better than that.
So when it first starts. So when it first starts, is it kind of like an image? Do you get images of what this person through the conversation you have with this image? It starts slowly melting into this real real person?
Okay, funnily enough, like their physical appearance does not really manifest itself until well after I have their
Well,
personality created.
right.
You know what
And
I mean?
I don't mean physical description,
Mhm.
but basically it's an esoteric
Yeah,
person.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, and like, you know, but they are a full-fledged person. I know what their quirks are going to be. I know what their personality is going to look like, you know, and I have to kind of build that to begin with anyway, because you want it to be consistent throughout your book. And then if it's going to be in a series, you want it to be consistent throughout the series and that kind of thing. So yeah, they become full-fledged people before I start really writing them, because I need to know how are they going to react in this situation when they get into it. So yeah. That
That's
being
great.
said, I will say, I'm going to throw this up here. I have on my website it's called Tools for Authors, and it's a resource where it's like a character development guide that helps you keep track of all that
Oh, that's
stuff.
fantastic.
So yeah.
And so for people that are listening to this, it is, bring that back up.
Yep.
It is jcarwrites.com/authors.
Yep.
And that's Carr with 2 R's. So jcarwrites.com/authors.
Thanks.
All right.
Your turn.
Perfect. My turn. We got 9 minutes left. It might be a
No,
little
we're
bit
going to
longer
go a
than that.
little longer, but it's interesting because I'm really interested to hear, like, because you write a supernatural paranormal type thing, and I'm like, I need to know why and how, because that's not normal for some of us.
Yes, well, you know,
Paranormal.
it's paranormal. You beat me to it. All right. So when I first started writing, it was one of those things where my first book was Them Bones, and the only thing that I had when I first thought about it was a coming of age murder mystery with a hint of the supernatural. That's all I had. It was just that sentence. That was the blurb, right? I had that first. And
I hate blurbs. Blurbs are
yeah.
the enemy.
Yeah. And it's funny because we all get that advice, write what you know. Write about what you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I never understood that until I started writing. And so what I did for the first book is I set it in a town that I knew growing up. And it was a small town in Southern Illinois. And I basically rated my memories, rated my memories of people, my memories of the town. And of course, you know, I changed things up obviously to fit the story. But that's how I came up with the first one. Was basically, okay, that was the sentence that I had in my head. I'm going to use the town and then the characters. You know, and at the time I didn't know who the characters were. I was just like, I needed a character. Okay, who would fit in this thing? Okay, I need this. You know, and so the protagonist is, you know, a 12 or 13-year-old boy, and you know, obviously he has a family and he has friends, and I had to come up with that. And then he meets this girl. Had to come up with her, and that was the first book. So, like I said, I rated a lot of memories. The second book, same thing, set in Southern Illinois. A lot of those characters are based off of people that I know, not 100%. Maybe I took 60% of one, 40% of another, put them together, and now I have a new character. But there were idiosyncrasies altogether. And so the second book, The Hermit, you know, that story idea came from, and it's funny because when I was a kid in Southern Illinois with my cousin, running around the woods, he told me once, hey, there's a hermit that lives up here. And for some reason that fascinated me up until, you know, like I said, I mean, obviously it fascinated me because here 20, 30 plus years later, I wrote a book about it, but obviously this hermit's a little bit different. And so, and that's also set in a real town in Southern Illinois, different town, but I use my memories from that, you know. And if you've read the book, there's actual little convenience store or a store in that town that I used, you know, for this purpose. And then the third book, Grave Disturbance. Now, once you start writing, you start looking for ideas. You know, you start looking. I mean, you already have ideas, but some ideas are better than others. And so Grave Disturbance, that one is set in Pensacola. And how it came about that one was my wife and I, it was like strange crimes, strange things that happened in Pensacola. And in the 50s, there was a crime that happened where someone had dug up these coffins or grave robbing, or something bad happened, right? Which was interesting, and so I had to do some research on that, like graves, but someone was strong enough to lift off the vault that was in the ground and pilfer or do whatever to these bodies, and it was just so, I was like, and they never caught the person that did it, which I found I was like, wow, that's so crazy. So once I heard that, I was thinking, there's a story there. And since I did work at Pensacola Police Department for a little bit, so I knew a lot of the procedures there. I knew how the headquarters was laid out. I knew how just different things that I used in the book. And so the whole premise of that book is this is what really happened. And now we're 50 years later and it's happening again.
Interesting. Yeah.
So that was the whole point of that book. And that's how I came up with that story idea. And then, like I said, the characters in there are people that I came across, people that I worked with, people, I mean, obviously not 100%, but similar. And then Something Wicked Waits, the last book that I came out last year. Oh my gosh, that book, that was the first book where I didn't 100% use my own experiences. Like I said, all the books prior to that were books I kind of like, okay, well, I'm taking this and I'm doing this. Oh, I will say this, in between Grave Disturbance, Something Wicked Waits, I was writing an urban fantasy. And in fact, I'm writing the urban fantasy that I was writing then. And I hit to a point where I'm like, okay, I can't write anymore. And then Something Wicked hit Waits. Man, that struck me as a lightning bolt through my head. And I'm like, I've got to write this story. And so the reason why it struck like lightning was when I was a child, there was a book by Ray Bradbury called Something Wicked This Way Comes. And in the 80s, Disney made a movie, of that book. And when I was a kid, I watched that show, and that was, and of course, if you watch it today, it's corny and it's goofy. But back when, back in the early 80s, that was some lead stuff right there, and it was so eerie. And that's the thing I like the most, is I like that eerie feeling. I can't stand slasher horrors. I can't stand screamers. I can't stand all that stuff. But I love a good story that's just eerie, that just makes you feel, ooh, just the chills, So, and obviously that storyline was about a carnival that comes to town, and the carnival's evil, and the town, there's changes and all that. So my thought was, well, the carnivals are always bad. Well, what about if this time the carnival is good? And it's the town that might be a little off. And so that was the whole premise of that story. And it's interesting enough because in The Hermit, I had a little blurb about a carnival that came to town. So that was my carnival for this story. And so obviously I was like, okay, well, this story needs this. Okay, I need a character. Okay, so who am I going to use? Well, the person that runs the show, obviously, and then through that, he had family. And then, as you're writing, characters kind of start springing up, at least for me, because, you start, okay, he talks to this person. Well, who's this person? Okay, well, then you got to, kind of figure out who this person is. And then, oh, he has a daughter now. Okay, so who's this daughter? And that's what I find so interesting, especially as a pantser, is, I discover all these things as I'm writing. And it's like, you're doing this whole exercise of like, well, like I said, who is this person and why are they here? And then they show up later in the story or whatever. And you start coming up with story arcs and things like that. So a lot of it you do on the fly. And I think outliners the same way. They just do it beforehand. But I don't know. I'm not an outliner.
Outliners are just pantsers who take it in small increments.
That's right.
Right. Beforehand. And then they write it. Right.
They just fill in the blanks is what it is.
And then obviously the urban fantasy is, I read a lot of those, and that's something I always want. I live in New Orleans now. And so the one I'm writing now is about an NOPD detective werewolf. And I'm looking forward to getting that off my plate. But I think it's good. But we all think our own stuff's good. So.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Some of us don't. Some of us are like,
you brought up an interesting
really like
problem. You brought up an interesting problem. the whole concept, and this is one that can be debated for 10 podcasts, but write what you know.
Right.
I don't know anything about living on the planet Drakmar, or having glyph magic, or having the ability to fight different creatures, but I do know what it is to be a human.
Right.
I assume I'm human.
Most days.
I don't know, but your newsletter, you're an alien, so
that is true,
which is pretty
but
good.
that is part of, I think, write what you know is misleading to novice authors, because none of us here are writing what we know.
Right.
I mean, Jen, are you a country music star?
No. But
you wrote one really well.
Thanks. Yeah.
And that's where things, we have to take that statement and not take it quite so literally as some people try to.
Agreed.
Yes, we write what we know, but we don't write exclusively what we know, because that's called a memoir.
Right. No, I totally agree with that. It's not. I mean, you write. You know human behavior. You know human interaction. You know what makes. You know what, how people act in certain situations. So when we say, or when I say, write what you know, that's really what I mean. Now, for me, I totally rated a lot of things that I know, but I think a lot of people, they don't understand what that means. Right? Like, what do I know? What do I know? I know how to be.
You can't take it too seriously.
Right. Like, I know how to be a teacher in a third grade or whatever. I'm not a teacher, but I'm saying, like, different people hear things and they're like, well, all I know is how to do this menial, not menial, but like whatever jobs they got. Right. I don't want to detract anybody, but whatever jobs that they have, and they don't think they know anything, but you do, because you know how you act, you know how your family acts, you know how different things, and you can use that for your stories and your books. That's all I kind of meant when that.
No, I agree. It's just I've listened to enough of these podcasts that people don't always know what those words mean. And the number one way to bypass the fact you don't know something is to read. That's the weirdest part about being an author, is the more you read, the better of an author you'll become.
Right.
I know for a fact that if I've been reading for not quite 40 years, but every book I've read has been helpful in some way. Like, I just read Jen's book. It's really good. I still haven't caught up on my sleep, but it's really helpful. You're not sorry at all. It's really helpful because I've never read a romance novel. And honestly, I'm missing out. Now, I've read Pride and Prejudice, but that's more of a satirical political diatribe against Regency by a person who lived in the Regency era that happens to be a romance. Now, did this help me? Yes, I read this book. I now have ideas for what I'm going to do in my next book where there's people in love with each other.
Right.
Maybe I'll be able to be a little meaner to the people. That's part of being an author. But I couldn't have known that if I hadn't read, because I will, like I said, I will never be a country music star. I will never be a female. And so those things mean that I can't know unless I read. And by reading, and that's literally what education is all about.
Definitely.
I have degrees so that I don't have to apprentice for 80 years to become an engineer.
Right. Absolutely. Well, and that I mean, we could go on, like, as far as character development is concerned, and story development. Like, the more you read, you figure out, you know what, this doesn't appeal to me, and therefore I'm not going to write that. But this does, and so I'm going to, to learn. But you also have to be very careful that you don't, like, start writing stereotypes. That's a whole other thing. Yeah, you can't write from the female perspective because neither of you are female. However, if you find a female who does write a good female perspective, by all means, read more of that and learn how to do it. And so that way you avoid writing the female stereotype, because we're not all the same.
I mean, that's true. And it's not even something you actively do, right? Your subconscious latches onto that, and it just kind of goes into there. It kind of reminds me of leadership. It almost kind of reminds me of like a leadership idea as well. As like, anytime you come into someone that's leading, you learn from that person. Hopefully you learn of things of to do, right? But unfortunately, sometimes we learn things we don't. I'll never do that if I'm ever
exactly.
and that's the same thing with reading too, like we discussed. So all right, it's coming
one last thing. We are getting close to the time, but you said
we're past the time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I think this is a perfect example of how an author thinks. Because when you said hermit, I thought of hermit crabs. And then you do paranormal. So in my brain, it all connected. You could have a character who is a hermit crab that happens to also live as a hermit, as a human, because he can transmogrify back and forth between the two species. So part of the time he is a human-sized hermit crab, and part of the time he is a hermit human who lives on his own. And that is how stories start. That you, especially the ridiculous, you grab onto the ridiculous and you force it to be sane. You force it to fit into some box.
Depending on the story,
tell you its story. Yes.
Yeah.
But even then, even a modern story like set totally literary, there is no genre in it at all. You're right. It's still everything is about taking some weird thing, some weird situation, and forcing it into a story. And it's almost like those old timey laundry machines where you wring out the liquid. That liquid is your story, and you're wringing it out of those clothes by whatever means you can.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, I like the Stephen King wrote a book on writing. It's called On Writing, for those of you that haven't heard of it. Great book. And he talks about how the writing process is basically like you're an archaeologist, and you are digging up the bones of the story, and you have different tools, right? You have words, you have syntax, you have all these different chapter length, different things to uncover the bones of whatever you're trying to uncover. And I just found that to be such a fascinating, and it's so true, right? I mean, anyway, like I said, man, we and people that are listening and watching, we could talk all night about that.
It's true. And because we all have such different ways of approaching that archaeological dig, if you will,
Right. So,
and we haven't even gotten into how outliners do it differently than the three of us.
Yeah, which
they don't matter.
At some point we will do that. Which actually that brings up a great segue into ending the show. By the way, if you're an author and you think that you want to come on here and tell us about how you do things, we would love to have you come on. Be sure to reach out to our email. Let me pop that up there. authorsdilemma@gmail.com. And if you want to come on the show at some point, we will have guests on here, and basically we'll interview you to figure out how you do things. I guess that's about it. Is there anything else?
Go buy Hyrum's book. He's got one coming out. And then when Josh gets his out, you'll have to go get his.
HyrumHawks.com.
There you go.
It's a super easy website.
All right. So everyone, thank you so much for watching. Like I said, have any questions, you know where to find us. Be sure to tune in next week. We'll be here, same TAD time, same TAD channel. But good night, everyone. Take care.